The small town of Millbridge had always been quiet, nestled between rolling hills and endless fields that swayed gently in the summer breeze. For many of its residents, Sunday mornings meant one thing: the gathering at the old stone church that stood proudly at the town's heart, its spire reaching toward the sky like a finger pointing to something divine. At the pulpit stood Pastor Raymond Lowell, a man whose presence was both calming and commanding, a beacon for the weary souls who sought solace in his sermons. Raymond was 51 that year, a man with a weathered face softened by kind eyes and a voice that could carry both the thunder of conviction and the whisper of comfort. He had served as the pastor of Millbridge Community Church for over 2 decades, earning the respect and affection of nearly everyone who crossed the church's threshold. To many, he was more than a pastor. He was a counselor, a friend, a steady pillar through times of hardship and hope alike. The Sunday in question began like any other. The church bells rang through the crisp autumn air, calling parishioners to worship. The pews filled steadily, families, elderly couples, young children clinging to their parents' hands, and even those who only came occasionally, drawn by the warmth of the congregation and the powerful sermons Raymond delivered. That day, the church seemed especially alive, as if something unspoken stirred beneath the surface. Raymond had chosen a particular theme for his sermon that morning: resurrection. Not just the biblical resurrection of Christ, but the deeper idea of renewal, rebirth, and hope, even in the darkest moments. His voice carried passion and conviction as he spoke about faith triumphing over despair, the promise of new beginnings, and the power of the Spirit to rise again, no matter how many times life tried to break it. His words resonated deeply with the congregation. Some felt tears prick their eyes. Others nodded quietly, absorbing every syllable. After the service, Raymond stood at the church's heavy wooden doors, greeting everyone warmly, shaking hands, offering gentle blessings. His presence seemed to fill the space with comfort and strength. But then something unusual happened. After the last parishioner left and the church grew quiet, Raymond excused himself and stepped into his office, a small room just off the main sanctuary, filled with shelves of worn Bibles, notebooks, and a scattering of personal mementos. The office window overlooked the ancient cemetery behind the church, where weathered gravestones marked the resting places of generations past. He had promised to prepare a special outreach program for the local youth group later that week, and there were notes he wanted to finalize. But that afternoon, when a church volunteer went to check on him, the office was empty. No sign of Raymond anywhere else in the building. No note, no explanation, no indication of where he might have gone. Hours passed. Calls were made. Police were alerted. The town was stunned. Pastor Raymond Lowell, a man who seemed as rooted to Millbridge as the church itself, had simply vanished without a trace. In the days that followed, rumors began to spread. Some whispered about a possible secret life. Others speculated about foul play or a planned disappearance. But no concrete evidence surfaced. It was as if the pastor had been swallowed by the very shadows of the church he loved. The community mourned deeply. Vigils were held, prayers whispered into the night, but the silence from Raymond's side remained absolute. The church, once a place of joyful gathering, grew somber and uneasy. Parishioners wondered if the message of resurrection had been a premonition rather than a promise. As the weeks turned into months, the church itself began to show signs of neglect. The furnace, old and unreliable, sputtered and failed repeatedly, leaving the building cold through harsh winters. The choir robes, once proudly worn during Sunday services, hung forgotten in a musty closet. Yet, despite the void left by their pastor's disappearance, some parishioners felt a strange presence lingering in the church, an almost imperceptible sensation, like a whisper on the edge of hearing or a shadow flickering just beyond sight. Some said they heard faint footsteps in the empty hallways or glimpsed a figure standing silently at the back of the sanctuary during late-night prayers. The mystery of Pastor Raymond Lowell's disappearance would haunt Millbridge for years to come, a secret buried deep beneath the surface of the church's stone walls, waiting patiently for the day it might finally be uncovered. The weeks following Pastor Raymond Lowell's disappearance stretched into months, and the rhythm of Millbridge Community Church began to falter. The once vibrant heart of the small town now beat unevenly, each Sunday marked by a mix of sorrow, uncertainty, and whispered questions no one dared to voice aloud. Without their shepherd, the congregation struggled to maintain the sense of unity and hope that Raymond had fostered. The elders attempted to hold services in his stead, but their voices lacked his fervor. Their prayers felt hollow. Visitors to the church spoke in hushed tones of the heavy silence that had settled over the sanctuary, a silence that seemed to press down on the very souls of those who entered. The church building itself, weathered by time and the elements, began to show signs of deeper neglect. The stone steps leading to the entrance cracked and chipped. The stained glass windows, once dazzling mosaics of color and light, dulled under layers of dust and grime. The choir robes, once gleaming white and crimson, hung in their closet like forgotten ghosts, their fabric stiff and musty. Among the few who remained steadfast in their faith was Miriam Turner, a devoted parishioner who had served as the church's choir director for nearly 30 years. Miriam was a petite woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes sharp as an eagle's. She often said the church was a living thing, breathing, feeling, waiting. To Miriam, the absence of Pastor Lowell was not just the loss of a man, but the loss of a guiding spirit that kept the church alive. "Sometimes," Miriam whispered to a small circle of close friends one chilly autumn evening, "I hear the faintest sound of footsteps near the choir loft when no one is there. And once I thought I saw a shadow move just beyond the stained glass near the altar. I don't know if it's the pastor or something else, but the church hasn't felt empty to me, not really." Her words were met with uneasy silence, broken only by the crackling of the fireplace in the old parish house adjacent to the church. The group sat together, wrapped in thick shawls, each wrestling with their own fears and hopes. The church furnace, a relic from decades past, had been sputtering since before Raymond's disappearance, but now it was unreliable at best. During particularly cold nights, the building would grow unbearably chilly, the cold seeping into the bones of the old stone and the hearts of those inside. Repairs were often attempted, but parts were scarce and expensive, and the ancient system seemed to resist revival. In the basement beneath the church, a dark and forgotten world stretched out beneath the sanctuary, a tangle of pipes, rusted machinery, and shadowed corners that few dared to enter. The old furnace sat in a metal cage near the back wall, silent and cold for years, its access hatch welded shut, rust eating away at the edges. This basement was where the janitor, Frank Delaney, had made his home during his early weeks on the job. Frank was a grizzled man in his late 50s, a former factory worker with strong hands and a quiet demeanor. He took pride in caring for the church building, even if the congregation's numbers were dwindling and the church seemed to grow lonelier by the day. One evening, while attempting to diagnose a mysterious rattling sound emanating from beneath the floorboards, Frank stumbled upon the welded access hatch. Curious and somewhat wary, he spent several days searching for tools strong enough to pry open the stubborn metal. When the hatch finally gave way, revealing a narrow shaft leading into the darkness, Frank hesitated before descending with a flashlight in hand. The air was thick with dust, and an old, acrid smell that seemed to cling to the stone walls like a shroud. What he found inside would haunt him for the rest of his life. Beneath layers of soot and melted metal, tangled in a charred heap, lay fragments of what looked like choir robes, unmistakably similar to those Miriam had kept in the closet upstairs. The fabric was twisted and fused together, scorched beyond recognition. Amid the wreckage rested a gold crucifix, dulled but still gleaming faintly, partially preserved in a small pocket of cold air. Frank's hands trembled as he lifted the fragile crucifix from the ashes. Questions flooded his mind. How had these robes ended up here, inside the furnace that had been cold and unused for years? Could it be connected to Pastor Lowell's disappearance? And if so, what unspeakable truth did this charred relic conceal? News of Frank's discovery spread quickly through the small town, reigniting whispers and theories that had lain dormant. Some spoke of dark rituals, others of tragic accidents, but no one could offer a definitive answer. The church's history seemed to unravel before their eyes, revealing shadows beneath the surface of their faithful community. That same week, the church council decided to install a security camera inside the furnace chamber to monitor the space and protect it from further damage. The camera was mounted in 1995, its presence largely forgotten until one cold autumn night, when a glitch revealed something no one expected: a fleeting ghostly figure moving within the furnace's dark heart. Frank Delaney couldn't shake the image from his mind: the tangled mass of scorched choir robes and the golden crucifix resting in the furnace's depths. The discovery had unsettled him in a way he had never expected. For years he had seen the church as a simple place of worship, a building needing upkeep, not a vault of secrets best left buried. That night, sleep eluded him. He kept replaying the scene over and over, the smell of burnt fabric still lingering in his nostrils. Who had put those robes there? How had they melted into such a twisted heap? And why was the crucifix still there, glinting like a silent witness? The furnace itself was a monstrous relic, a massive iron beast that had powered the church's warmth for decades. Yet by the early 90s, it had fallen into disrepair and was seldom used. Its cold silence became a metaphor for the church's fading vitality after Pastor Lowell's disappearance. Curiosity gnawed at Frank. Over the next days, he found himself drawn to the church basement more often, inspecting the furnace and its surrounding chambers. He noticed the welded hatch had been sealed tightly, as if to trap something inside. One afternoon, while examining the furnace's metal frame, Frank spotted something odd: small scratches near the base of the hatch, fresh enough to suggest recent disturbance. Could someone have been inside the furnace chamber after all these years? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Frank decided to ask Miriam Turner, the choir director, about the robes. If anyone might know about the choir's possessions or strange happenings, it was her. Miriam listened intently as Frank described the find. Her usually steady hands trembled slightly. "That furnace was never meant to hold anything but fire," she said softly, "but it has always felt wrong, like it hides more than just old ashes. Choir robes and the crucifix, it's like a sacrilege." She paused, glancing toward the stained glass windows that filtered fading daylight into fractured patterns on the dusty floor. "Raymond was different in his last weeks," she continued, her voice dropping. "He spoke of darkness coming to the church, not outside forces, but something inside. I thought it was metaphor. Now, I'm not so sure." As word of Frank's discovery spread, the church council reluctantly approved installation of a small internal camera within the furnace chamber in 1995. The technology was primitive by modern standards, a grainy black-and-white feed monitored from a nearby room, but it offered a window into a space that had been a sealed mystery for decades. For years, the camera showed only the cold, empty chamber, coated in soot and shadow. Nothing moved, no disturbance, no sign of life or presence. Until one late autumn night, when the feed glitched. The screen flickered, the grainy image dancing between static and faint shapes. Then, suddenly, a figure appeared, blurred and indistinct, moving slowly through the furnace chamber. The figure was draped in flowing robes, but no clear features could be discerned. For a brief moment, the shape paused, as if sensing the watchful eyes of the camera, then vanished into the shadows. The next morning, the church staff reviewed the footage in stunned silence. Some dismissed it as a trick of the light, a technical malfunction. Others whispered that it was a sign, perhaps Pastor Lowell's spirit trapped within the furnace's confines, reaching out from beyond. Miriam, however, felt a chill that ran deeper than the autumn cold. "This isn't just a ghost story," she said, her voice trembling. "Something truly terrible happened here, and it's not finished." Meanwhile, Frank's investigation deepened. He began poring over old church records, maintenance logs, and even local newspaper archives, searching for any clues about the furnace or the pastor's disappearance. One article caught his eye: dated just months before Raymond vanished. It told of an unexplained fire scare in the church basement, where a small blaze had been quickly contained near the furnace. The cause was never determined, and the incident was quickly swept under the rug. Frank's heart pounded. Could this fire scare have been connected to the choir robes? Had someone tried to destroy evidence? And if so, what evidence? The answers lay buried, but Frank was determined to uncover them, even if it meant confronting darkness beyond his understanding. The discovery of the charred choir robes and crucifix in the furnace was only the beginning. The small town of Millbridge buzzed with unease and speculation. Frank Delaney's finding had disturbed a fragile peace, like stirring embers that refused to be buried. That autumn evening, the church council gathered in the dimly lit meeting room above the sanctuary. The heavy wooden table was strewn with old documents, photographs, and the grainy stills taken from the furnace camera. Miriam Turner sat quietly among the members, her face pale but resolute. Father Michael Grant, the interim priest brought in to fill the void after Raymond's disappearance, cleared his throat. "We cannot ignore what Frank found," he said solemnly, "nor can we dismiss the footage from the camera. Something happened here, something terrible." One of the elders, a gruff man named Harold Jenkins, leaned forward. "This talk of ghosts and shadows only fuels fear. We should focus on repairs and moving forward, not dredging up old wounds." Miriam shook her head. "Harold, this isn't about superstition. There's evidence, physical evidence, that something was hidden in that furnace. Choir robes don't just end up melted inside a boiler by accident." Frank added, "And the crucifix. It wasn't just melted, it was placed there, carefully. Someone wanted to preserve it, even as the robes were destroyed." The group fell silent, the weight of Frank's words hanging heavy in the stale air. Frank returned to the basement that evening, determined to explore the furnace chamber more thoroughly. Armed with a flashlight and a small crowbar, he descended the narrow stairs into the cavernous space below. The furnace was cold, its massive iron frame looming like a sleeping giant. The melted robes were gone, removed by the church for preservation, but the smell of smoke and burnt fabric still clung faintly to the walls. Frank's beam of light traced the chamber's walls, searching for any clue he might have missed. His eyes caught on an irregularity, a faint outline on the soot-blackened stone, as if something had been recently disturbed. Pressing closer, Frank discovered a small niche hidden behind a loose panel. Inside lay a folded piece of parchment, brittle with age, but remarkably intact. With trembling hands, Frank unfolded it. The parchment bore a handwritten note, penned in a hurried scrawl. "The darkness grows within these walls. I fear what I have unleashed. If this is my last entry, may God forgive me." Below the message was a name, Raymond Lowell. Back upstairs, Frank shared the note with Miriam and Father Grant. Their faces grew pale as they absorbed the gravity of the confession. "What could he have unleashed?" Miriam whispered, clutching the note tightly. Father Grant spoke slowly. "Whatever it was, it must be connected to the furnace and the choir robes, perhaps a ritual or a desperate act." Miriam's thoughts turned to the last sermons Raymond had delivered, the obsession with resurrection, the warnings of encroaching darkness. Perhaps they were not merely sermons, but a cry for help. Over the following weeks, strange events escalated in the church. Flickering lights, sudden drops in temperature, and unexplained noises echoed through the sanctuary. One night, Miriam was alone in the choir loft when she heard faint singing, a low, mournful chant rising from the basement below. Drawn by the sound, she descended into the darkness. At the furnace chamber door, the singing ceased abruptly. Inside, the chamber was empty, but the air was thick with an oppressive energy, a weight that pressed down on her chest. Suddenly, Miriam's eyes caught a shadow flickering at the edge of her vision. She turned sharply, but nothing was there. Heart-pounding, she fled back upstairs, knowing that the church held secrets darker than anyone had imagined. The charred robes, the crucifix, the hidden note, all pieces of a puzzle that spoke of a terrible event buried in the church's past. What had Pastor Raymond Lowell discovered or unleashed? And was it still waiting, lurking in the ashes, ready to claim more souls. The note found in the furnace chamber shook the small community of Millbridge to its core. Pastor Raymond Lowell's last written words hinted at a darkness creeping inside the church, a darkness no one had yet fully understood. Frank Delaney, Miriam Turner, and Father Michael Grant formed a tentative alliance, united by a growing conviction that the church itself harbored a sinister secret. Each night, the unease grew heavier, as if the very walls whispered warnings to those who dared listen. Frank, normally pragmatic and unflappable, found himself haunted by restless dreams. In his visions, he saw the pastor standing beneath the altar, eyes wide with terror, murmuring prayers that twisted into desperate pleas. Flames flickered behind Raymond, but no fire consumed him, only shadows that reached and writhed like living things. Miriam, meanwhile, dove into the church archives, searching for any record of unusual events during Raymond's tenure. Among dusty ledgers and brittle hymnals, she uncovered a series of cryptic diary entries written by the pastor himself. They spoke of strange visitors, late-night meetings, and an obsession with a forgotten relic buried beneath the church, a relic believed to hold power over life and death. One entry, dated just days before his disappearance, was chilling in its urgency. The weight of the secret grows unbearable. I fear the consequences of unearthing what lies beneath. The choir robes, they hide more than just fabric. They conceal a curse that has festered for centuries. If I do not survive this, may God have mercy on us all. Father Grant frowned as he read the passage aloud. This isn't just a disappearance. It's a warning. Driven by a mixture of fear and resolve, Frank and Miriam resolved to investigate the church's crypt, a labyrinthine burial chamber beneath the altar, long sealed and rarely visited. The crypt had been the source of rumors for generations, stories whispered in the shadows about vanished priests and dark rituals. One evening, under the cloak of twilight, they descended into the crypt, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The walls were lined with ancient tombs and faded inscriptions, some illegible with age. In the heart of the crypt, they found a heavy stone door sealed with iron bands. Etched into the stone was a symbol, a twisted cross entwined with thorny vines, unmistakably tied to the church's dark history. Using tools borrowed from the local historical society, they pried open the door, revealing a narrow chamber beyond. Inside lay a collection of relics, broken chalices, rusted keys, and a faded manuscript wrapped in oilskin. The manuscript was a ledger of rituals performed by the church's earliest clergy, rituals intended to bind a malevolent force that had haunted the town for centuries. As Miriam carefully turned the fragile pages, a sudden chill swept through the crypt. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows that seemed to writhe along the walls. Frank's flashlight flickered, then died. In the suffocating darkness, a whisper echoed, a voice both distant and intimate, repeating a single word: resurrect. Back above ground, the town of Millbridge was becoming restless. Strange sightings and unexplained phenomena began to seep into daily life. Animals avoided the church grounds, and children spoke of a shadow man who watched silently from the cemetery at dusk. At the church, the furnace's camera recorded sporadic flickers of movement, growing more defined with each passing night. Some parishioners claimed to see figures in choir robes drifting silently through the aisles after hours, their faces obscured, their presence chilling. Miriam and Frank knew time was running out. The darkness Pastor Lowell had feared was stirring again, fueled by secrets and sins buried deep in the church's foundations. And somewhere in the shadows, the pastor himself might still be trapped, caught between worlds, a guardian or a prisoner of a terrible power. The cold grip of fear tightened over Millbridge as autumn gave way to a bitter early winter. The church, once a sanctuary, had become a place of dread, its ancient stones steeped in secrets long buried. Frank and Miriam's discovery in the crypt was just the beginning. The faded manuscript revealed rituals meant to contain a force older than the town itself, a presence linked to death, fire, and resurrection. But the bindings had weakened, and the malevolent shadow was creeping back. One evening, Father Michael Grant convened a private meeting with Frank and Miriam in the church's vestry. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across their faces as Father Grant laid out a troubling plan. "We cannot face this darkness alone," he said quietly. "I have contacted a specialist, someone versed in the occult and ancient rites. If we are to confront what lies beneath this church, we must be prepared." Miriam nodded, her hands clenched tightly. "Pastor Lowell tried to stop it. We owe it to him and to the congregation to see this through." Days later, a stranger arrived in Millbridge, Dr. Evelyn Harrow, an expert in folklore and religious history with a reputation for unraveling mysteries others dared not touch. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and an unyielding calm that unsettled even the bravest. Her arrival sparked curiosity and fear alike. Dr. Harrow requested access to the church archives, the crypt, and the furnace chamber. She studied the charred choir robes, the crucifix, and the surveillance footage with meticulous care. "There is a pattern here," she explained. "This church was built over a site of ancient power, a place where the boundary between life and death is thin. The choir robes were not just garments, they were part of a binding ritual, worn by those who served as guardians." Her gaze darkened. "Pastor Lowell discovered this, and he tried to renew the bindings. But something went wrong. The furnace, once a source of warmth, became a prison. It holds more than ashes. It traps a fragment of that darkness." Frank listened, skeptical yet desperate. "So, what now? How do we stop it?" Dr. Harrow's expression was grave. "We must perform a cleansing ritual, but it's dangerous. The force we face is ancient and vengeful. It will not give up its hold without a fight." As preparations began, strange incidents escalated. Parishioners reported unexplained cold spots, objects moving on their own, and haunting melodies echoing through empty halls. One night, Miriam awoke to the sound of footsteps in the choir loft. She found a single choir robe draped over the pews, eerily intact despite the furnace's destruction. The fabric was cold to the touch, and the gold crucifix was sewn into its collar. A message was whispered on the cold wind: "Resurrect the fallen, free the bound." Miriam's heart pounded. The darkness was no longer contained. It was calling out, seeking release. The night of the cleansing ritual arrived. The church was filled with flickering candles, ancient symbols drawn in chalk, and the quiet murmurs of prayer. Dr. Harrow led the ceremony, her voice steady as she invoked protective blessings and ancient incantations. Frank, Miriam, and Father Grant joined hands, their faith a fragile shield against the rising storm. But as the ritual reached its climax, the furnace camera flickered to life, showing a figure emerging from the shadows. The unmistakable silhouette of Pastor Raymond Lowell. His eyes glowed faintly, and his voice echoed through the chamber. "The darkness is not defeated, only waiting." The flickering image on the furnace camera held the room in stunned silence. Pastor Raymond Lowell's figure, faint and spectral, hovered in the shadows of the furnace chamber. A ghost caught between worlds, neither fully alive nor entirely gone. Miriam's breath caught in her throat. Is he really here?" she whispered, her eyes glued to the grainy screen. Dr. Evelyn Harrow's face was grave. "It's him, but not as we knew. He's tethered to that darkness, trapped in the furnace's prison. His spirit lingers, trying to warn us." Suddenly the church was plunged into a bone-chilling cold. The candles flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. The ancient symbols on the floor glowed faintly, as if awakening from a long slumber. Father Michael's voice rose in prayer, steady and unwavering. "In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." Frank felt the air thicken around him, a heavy presence pressing down. The furnace door groaned as if something powerful struggled to break free. From the shadows, a whisper grew louder. The word repeated again and again. Resurrect, resurrect. Suddenly the furnace hatch burst open with a deafening clang. A surge of hot, black smoke poured out, swirling into a shape, a dark figure cloaked in tattered choir robes, eyes burning with malevolent fire. The congregation gasped, stepping back in terror as the entity advanced. It was a twisted echo of Pastor Lowell, corrupted by the darkness, a revenant born of fire and shadow. Dr. Harrow stepped forward, chanting a protective incantation. By the ancient rites I bind you, by the power of light and faith, be banished. The dark figure shrieked, recoiling but not retreating. The struggle between light and shadow crackled in the air like a storm. Frank gripped Miriam's hand tightly, his heart pounding. We have to hold on. We can't let it break free. The furnace rumbled violently as the spirit battled the bindings. Then, through the chaos, Pastor Lowell's voice rang clear, desperate, pleading. Stop this! I am not your enemy. The darkness is inside me. Inside us all. With a surge of will, Dr. Harrow adjusted the ritual, shifting from binding to release. She chanted prayers of forgiveness and salvation, reaching for the pastor's trapped soul. The dark figure faltered, eyes flickering between rage and sorrow. Slowly the malevolent shadow receded, revealing Pastor Lowell's ghostly form, pale but peaceful. A final breath escaped him as he spoke. Protect the church. Seal the past. Let the light heal. Then, with a flash of white light, he vanished, leaving the furnace chamber silent and still. The church breathed a collective sigh of relief. The oppressive darkness had lifted, but the scars remained. Father Michael turned to the gathered crowd. Raymond's sacrifice saved us, but we must remember, evil festers where secrets lie. Frank and Miriam exchanged a look, understanding that their journey was far from over. The church had been saved, for now, but the past, with its shadows and whispers, still waited patiently beneath the surface. The church felt different after that night, lighter somehow, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The oppressive weight that had hung over Millbridge seemed to lift, though a lingering chill remained in the air. Frank and Miriam spent the following days helping Father Michael oversee repairs and restoration, working to heal both the building and the shaken community. Yet, beneath their tireless efforts, a quiet unease persisted. In the quiet moments, Miriam often found herself drawn back to the archives, searching for answers about the church's dark history and Pastor Lowell's final days. Among the old papers, she discovered a faded journal belonging to one of the earliest pastors, a man named Elijah Harrow, perhaps a distant ancestor of Dr. Evelyn Harrow. Elijah's journal chronicled a time when the church had first been built over the ancient site, describing rituals designed to protect the town from a creeping darkness. But it also spoke of fractures, moments when the binding was broken, when the darkness seeped into the hearts of men. One entry stood out. The choir robes are the symbol and the seal. Those who wear them bind themselves to the church and the curse. It is a burden passed down from one guardian to the next. Raymond bore it bravely, but the weight was too great. Miriam shared her findings with Dr. Harrow, who nodded thoughtfully. The past is not just history, she said. It's a living thread that weaves through the present. Raymond's disappearance, the furnace, the rituals, all part of a cycle. Frank, though skeptical of such ancient ties, couldn't deny the patterns. So, what happens now? Are we safe? Dr. Harrow's eyes were steady. Safe is a relative word. The darkness was pushed back, not destroyed. The church and its people must remain vigilant. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Miriam stood before the now quiet furnace. The charred remains had been removed, replaced with a new, modern system. Yet, as the last light faded, she noticed a faint glow emanating from the old access hatch. Curious and cautious, she reached out and touched the metal door. A sudden warmth spread through her fingers, a pulse, like a heartbeat. The warmth grew, and in the fading light Miriam glimpsed a vision. Pastor Lowell standing beneath the altar, eyes full of hope, hands raised as if blessing the church and its people. A whisper followed, gentle and clear. "The light remains. Guard it well." The next day, the church held a special service in memory of Pastor Lowell, a celebration of his sacrifice and the resilience of the Millbridge community. The choir sang softly, their robes once again clean and bright. Frank, Miriam, and Father Michael stood together, bound by the trials they had faced and the mysteries they had uncovered. Though the shadows had not vanished entirely, a fragile peace had been restored. And somewhere deep beneath the church, the legacy of the choir robes and the men who bore them lived on, silent but unbroken. Winter settled over Millbridge, cloaking the town in snow and silence. The church, once a place shadowed by fear, now stood as a beacon of hope, its stone walls warmed by candles and prayers. Frank Delaney had returned to his routine, but the weight of what he had witnessed stayed with him. Miriam Turner had become a trusted guardian of the church's history, her dedication unwavering. Father Michael Grant preached with renewed purpose, carrying the legacy of Pastor Raymond Lowell with humility and strength. Yet the memories of those dark days, the vanished pastor, the furnace's secrets, and the ancient curse lingered like an echo beneath their everyday lives. One evening, as the church emptied after a quiet service, Miriam found herself drawn once more to the furnace chamber. The new system hummed softly, a stark contrast to the haunted relic it had replaced. As she stood before the sealed hatch, a gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying a faint scent of incense and old wood. The warmth she had felt before returned, this time stronger, wrapping around her like a protective embrace. From the shadows, a soft voice seemed to whisper, "Faith is the light that binds us. As long as it burns, no darkness can prevail." Miriam closed her eyes, feeling a profound peace settle over her. The struggle was over, but the watchfulness must continue. Months later, during the church's annual feast, the community gathered to celebrate life, faith, and the resilience of their shared history. Children laughed beneath stained glass windows, and the choir sang with joy and reverence. Frank approached Miriam quietly. "Do you think we'll ever truly understand what happened?" She smiled softly. "Maybe not. Some mysteries are meant to remind us that light and darkness coexist. What matters is how we choose to live in between." As they looked toward the altar, a single ray of sunlight pierced through the stained glass, illuminating the golden crucifix that had been recovered from the furnace all those years ago. The story of Pastor Raymond Lowell, his disappearance, his sacrifice, and the shadows he faced, had become legend in Millbridge, a reminder of the thin line between faith and fear, life and death, light and shadow. And though the church's walls held secrets, the community's heart beat strong, guarded by the legacy of those who came before. The choir robes had burned, but their spirit endured. The furnace was silent now, but its story lived on, a final benediction whispered in the stillness.